This is Pamela Worth with the Encourage Your Wellness podcast. And today I'm so thrilled to have three different people with us, Sylvia, Jarrid, and Mike. A lot of times we focus on practitioners, and today we're actually focusing on things that are practical in real life that can help families, especially those with special ed. So thank you for being here, and I would love to pass it off to Sylvia to talk a little bit about your background, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you so much for having us here. I'm Sylvia Hall. I am co-founder of GAB-on, and I am mom to two teenage kids who are the inspiration behind the work we do with GAB-on. My background is 15 plus years of marketing, and when our oldest son was born and diagnosed with special education needs, I took some time off of my career and really focused on helping him navigate the world of education in and outside of school. And so I dove into taking classes on family engagement, on his diagnosis, and have walked the path hand in hand, I think. And as I mentioned, there kids to the inspiration behind GAB-on, and I will pass it on to my co-founder and husband, Jarrid Hall.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, so my name's Jarrid Hall, co-founder of GAB-on. My background is more on the, I spent about 15, 20 years in technology and business development and startups and large Fortune 500 companies. And my connection to GAB-on really came out of a desire, desperation to connect with my guy who learns differently. We can go into that more, but really most of my work has been about solving problems that other people couldn't. And GAB-on was just one of those problems that had never been solved before that we think we've come with a great solution to help families connect, especially those families with special education children.
Thank you, Jarrid and Sylvia, for creating GAB-on. I'm Mike Nuckola. I'm an educational and developmental researcher and practitioner. I'm a professor here at the University of Pennsylvania. And my work focuses primarily on studying interventions that help young people connect in school, connect in society, connect with their families. So my connection with GAB-on is that I see it as a unique tool for helping students connect with parents really across the spectrum of learning challenges, whether they're high achievers, struggling with identity issues in school, or younger students challenged by learning difficulties or other social difficulties. GAB-on serves as a unique way for building bridges across students, parents, and educators.
Thanks, Mike. So stepping away from just, we're not trying to promote GAB-on as much as we are trying to promote connections and bringing special needs and families together. Tell us what GAB-on is, and then Mike, maybe you can kind of layer in kind of what that means from practicality and research. Jarrid, you want to take that?
Great, thanks, Pam. I'll start if that's sure. I'll kick it off, and then if Jarrid can back me up, and Mike can bring his expertise as he always does. I think I'll just start with the simplicity of what we do. We understand that it's all about connections. It's all about building family relationships, because that is fundamental to a child's development and a child finding their way in the world. And so what we do is, in its most simple form, is we help kids remember their day and allow them to talk about it with their parents. And so those smaller conversations that start about what they do in school tend to lead to bigger conversations about social situations or peer relationships, what's happening in the world around them. And it helps us get to know our kids. And the more we can know our kids, the better parents we can be. And it just makes for a more connected family. It gives our kids a feeling of belonging, and it can transfer both in and out of school. It can change the trajectory of a family. So we created it for simplicity. It's simple to use, but the impact is complex and tremendous. Jarrid, do you want to add a lot more to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sylvia. As Sylvia said, we started this really from a family perspective to make sure that we could connect with our kids. But a little bit more of that backstory that goes along with that, with GAB-on, is that, when Austin was growing up, we were very connected and very, as a family. But as he grew older, I started to notice he was disconnecting. He was really trying to connect with friends. He was trying to connect in school. But we noticed that he really wasn't connecting in those ways. And I wanted to be more involved with him as well. And we thought a good medium for that was school discussions. And so what I did was went and talked to one of his teachers, and I asked him why he wasn't sharing more of his day with me. And I think what I'm going to talk about is similar for a lot of kids with special education needs. Is the teacher looked at me and said, "Well, he doesn't share his day with you because he can't remember his day." And she introduced me to the concept of working memory, and I didn't know what that was. And the way she described it to me was, working memory is what kids use from an executive function perspective to remember what happened during the day, what happened during conversations, what happened in class, to share later in the day with you. And he can't do that. So asking Austin to remember his day is like asking a blind person to try harder to see. Neurologically, he can't remember his day. So from a working memory perspective, he was in the 5th percentile. So when I asked him about his day, he literally could not remember. But this is something that's a challenge for kids with autism, ADD, dyslexia, kids with executive functioning challenges. In addition to working memory was processing delays. So when I'd ask him about his day, not only was he trying to remember, his speed for recalling was different than mine. And so his time for processing was taking longer than I understood was taking place. So we had two challenges to solve for Austin. And that's where GAB-on came in. We're just trying to give him a reminder, a hint, some way of capturing hints and reminders about his day that he could share with us at the end of the day. And you can do that many different ways. We found that the technology we created was the most simple and the easiest way to do it. What we also found was it really gave him a sense of confidence and a sense of belonging in the family. I think he started to disconnect from his peer group because of his working memory and processing delays. He also started having real challenges in school because of those two issues as well. But at home, he started remembering his day. He started talking about what he was doing. And that's so fundamental for our kids to be able to discuss and chat and share what they do, to show what they're doing at school and show part of being connected with the family. And we really started to see an evolution of Austin from an advocacy, from his voice development. And actually, he made such great progress with advocacy. He won the Grit Award in school for the progress he made and be able to advocate for himself and ask for help from teachers, from his resource team. And so that whole process he went through was doing so much work for his brain and for his confidence and for his advocacy and for his voice. We knew nothing about this until we met Mike. And Mike started to introduce us into these concepts about belonging, about mattering, about voice, about advocacy. All we knew was our guy was sitting up straighter at the dinner table. He was talking more. He was engaging with us. And the results from schools were getting better as well. So that's kind of our journey.
How did he remember what was going on? What was the process for him to be able to remember what was happening during the day and be able to tell you about it later?
Great question. So what he would do is during the day, the way I set up GAB-on was he'd capture hints and reminders electronically. And it would just be short 3 to 5 word hints about what took place. We didn't want a sentence. We didn't want a story. We wanted the letters to just give him enough information so when he saw it, he can say, oh yeah, I was in science class. Onion skin and lake water means we're looking at under a microscope. We're learning about microscopes, looking at onion skin. Then we get a vial of water from the local pond. We found a water bug. So that hint of onion skin and lake water gave him a reminder of where he was, what he was working on, and it could tell us a story. We wanted a story to come home. We wanted a conversation. We wanted his perspective about his day, about his experience. And so it was those few words that gave him a catalyst for remembering it.
Whose idea was it to use those particular words, and does it require collaboration with the school and with the teacher?
So it was his idea for his words. He chose onion skin and lake water. He said, this is what I'll be able to remember when I get home. And he was working in collaboration with his teachers. So his teachers were giving him a few minutes sometimes after each class or at the end of the day, to sit down and capture 4 hints and reminders that we call GABs that he would then send, that would get sent home to us. So the teacher was giving him time, but it was really his work and his effort to enter what he wanted to talk about at home. And
that was easier or more fun than simply writing it in a notebook, I would imagine, and then asking somebody to show you the notebook or I've got a couple of teenage kids too. And it's just, You always ask to see their notebook and what's going on, and they just kind of.
Yes. Yeah. Getting the paper out of a backpack.
Yeah.
Never really happens or really ever happens. And what we're able to do now is actually send reminders about the fact to enter them to kids, but also to parents. Hey, there's GABs waiting for you. We can send coaching as well. So we've made it electronic just for that reminder. So it's simply enter it on any web-enabled device, a Chromebook, a tablet, a phone, and it gets sent to an app on the parent's phone. So it's really simple. And the whole idea, as parents of a child with special education, we know how complex the world is around us, how involved we are with teachers, with doctors, with specialists. And for us, we need it simple. We need it easy. And we think for the community of special ed parents, we thought of them when we started to really build it out and engineer it as simple as possible and as quick as possible.
Did you find that you have to incorporate that as part of your IEP or 504 in order to get something like this across and done? Or do you feel like the education system is welcoming of different tools and techniques? And
so our experience was we didn't need it part of the IEP. We just talked to our special ed team that Austin was working with, and they were wide open to the idea. They actually loved the idea because most special ed educators know that however the conversations happen, those consistent conversations with the parent do so much for the child neurologically and chemically that'll put that child in a better place for learning. And those connections with the parents are so vital for the development and the scaffolding that teaches kids how to tell stories, how to have conversations. And so our experience has been with our group, they loved it. They were in it. Other families are finding the same experiences. I can't say that for everybody because we haven't talked to everyone that's used GAB-on, but that has been our experience so far.
And then, Mike, tell us a little bit about how you're working in this area. What kind of research are you finding? What are you doing in terms of driving more communication and helping people feel more confident and building those connections?
Well, let me start with this, Pamela. Just listening to Sylvia and Jarrid talk about the importance of communication and the impact it has on brain development, neurologically and otherwise. I often start my discussions around this with a very simple fact that people are interpersonal before they are individual. So if you think about an infant doesn't have a sense of being an individual person. An infant's connected to a caregiver, typically a mother, and learns to be a person through all those connections with the mother or the caregiving environment. As we age and continue to develop and learn in different ways, we're always learning interpersonally or through human interaction before we make that knowledge our own. So we often make the mistake of thinking about individual development preceding interpersonal development, whereas it's actually the reverse. Interpersonal or social development teaches us how to be individuals, how to be unique people in the world. So the more young people can connect with a variety of communicators, parents, educators, peers, the more they're going to learn. But the greater that challenge is dependent on the language capacities of the young person. So a child on the autism spectrum, for example, who might be lagging behind a little bit in communication skills, needs this kind of support even more than the average child. Every child needs rich communication to grow their minds and emotional development and social development. But the greater the challenges are, the more the scaffolding is needed. So as I've talked with Jarrid and Sylvia and our research team around this, we've thought a lot about how to measure engagement, social engagement between a child and parent, between a child and teacher. So we've looked at ways of building infrastructure within the GAB-on technology for capturing types of engagement, or Jarrid used the word connectedness, for capturing connectedness, because there's plenty of research to show that the richer the communication opportunities are for children, including children on the autism spectrum or any child with language challenges, the richer the communication, the greater the learning opportunities are going to be, the better the brain development is going to be. So when I learned of GAB-on and what Jarrid and Sylvia were trying to do, it just struck me as an ideal modality for promoting language development, learning, brain development, social and emotional development for young people. And schools have been looking for this and struggling with it. You can talk to any school leader pretty much, and they will say one of the greatest challenges for us is figuring out how to maximize parent participation in their children's learning. Well, GAB-on allows for that even without bringing the parent into the school. It kind of reverses it. The student is bringing the school home to the parents and then talking about school with the parents. So you have a multifold benefit there. You have the communication, the rich communication between the child and the parents about school. You're also building parent engagement with the school through these kinds of communications. So it's serving multiple purposes. And I truly believe from a research perspective that the more we can use this sort of technology, the greater the benefits are going to be for not only our students, but our students, our parents, and the educators who are trying to close the dots or connect the dots.
And, while you're coming at it from a special needs standpoint, I think it's going to benefit the entire family by having, a means of communicating. Let me ask this, though. As the kids go through certain periods of time in school, they don't really want to be individuals. They want to be, kind of fit in or whatever. Do you find that everyone in the class should be doing it? Or do you find that some kids are kind of hesitant to, want to use this if not everyone is? Or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think there'll be some hesitation and resistance by certain students, including maybe my own children. But as I've told Sylvia and Jarrid, kids like mine really need this. I was one of those parents who got the one-word answer. How was school today? Good. What'd you do? Not much. So if they could have given me words from the school day, I think we'd have had richer conversations because they weren't really opposed to talking with me. They couldn't even remember really because they were more interested in their peer interactions and sports. They didn't remember much about school. So the more scaffolding I could have had at that time, I think the richer our conversations would have been about school.
I'm gonna jump in if that's okay here, and add that in our situation, I actually had lovely conversations with Austin. We spent a lot of time together. We did all the therapies together. He would share information that he felt was important or that was top of mind or that he could happen to remember with me from his day. So I felt that I knew a lot about his day. I felt like I was very connected with him. But when we started GAB-on, I was actually wonderfully surprised at what I continued to learn about him, because there was so much that he wasn't telling me. And as you talked about the different stages and different ages in school, particularly as he got into middle school, it's tough for a kid who learns differently. They're pulled out. They've got push-ins. The social gaps widen. The academics gaps widen. They know they're different. They feel different. And it can be an unfun time. And so as a parent, I think it's very much our job and our privilege to know them, to continue to know them as they age, to get to know who they're becoming. And then as you do that, find out where they do thrive. We were able then to understand that school was very hard for him and he may not have had his peers in school. But through GAB-on, in our conversations that opened up where he found his joy, what he'd like to do, what he was interested in, we were then able to find places and environments outside of school that he could spend time and do what he loved to do and do it really well. And who else loved to do this? So we met peeps. He met his peeps, as he said. People he felt connected to. He built confidence because he got to be good at things. And he liked to do that. And carried on the path we continue to discover as he gets older, what that longevity and what that long-term goal for him might look like. And so it gave him, gave us just so much more insight as he went through the different stages of growth and development, and how they don't necessarily always want to be telling their parents everything, through the high school ages. But that's a time when it's really super important to be sharing. So even as someone who felt connected to him, I learned so much more about him, and still continue to do.
So, Jarrid and Mike, what ages do you find are the best for something like this? And is it an immediate kind of push notification to the parent of like, hey, don't forget to ask about this? Or is it something that you just kind of check when they get home or later in the evening? Or
Yeah, I'll kick off, Mike, and then I'll hand it off to you. From our experience has been about third grade is when kids start have the ability to actually enter in the words, the hints and reminders. But as you look at the stages of growth, you look at, from third to about fifth or sixth grade, kids are pretty responsive. They're pretty engaged. But about fifth or sixth grade, they start disconnecting. And what we've learned from family, they want to go hang out with their peers more. They want to be part of their groups. Is that middle school age is really where kids need it most. And they actually, what we found, Sylvia and I did a little bit of a study with a local school in Providence, Rhode Island. And because we've been hearing that kids won't do this. Kids don't want to do it. They don't want to talk to their parents. And we sat down and did a focus group with a group of students across the board. Every student said they wanted to talk to their parents. They just didn't know how, or the parent was too busy, or the parent was on their phone. They wanted to find a way to have a conversation. They wanted to connect with their families. And the kids physically showed a little bit of sadness that they weren't having more conversations or more engagement with their families. And then as you look into more high school, that's when kids really need their parents the most. So we see it can be used from third grade through 12. And for some kids beyond 12 who still need to connect with their parents, who may need to have more engagement with their families for whatever reason that is. So we see a whole spectrum of kids using it.
Yeah, I would agree with Jarrid in a number of ways. Certainly, he and Sylvia have the direct experience working with parents using this tool. But third grade makes a lot of sense to me as a time in elementary school when students are more capable of communicating using this sort of technology. The desire to do that would exist earlier. The capacity to do it through writing would be harder, as you get into first and second grade. There might be ways to adjust the technology, though, to use pictures or even other things for younger students. We've seen that at times. But I think the main point that I would add to what Jarrid said is that not only do I find that middle schoolers and high schoolers want to talk to their parents but don't know how, they're sometimes influenced by peer pressure in that regard. They might not want to show their peers that they want to talk to their mother or their father. So, figuring out how to use this in a way that's normative within schools, but even private for students. So students can do this, on their own, apart from peer observation, might be helpful in some ways. High school students, especially, this is a little bit of a gender stereotype, but it holds true in many social circles anyway. Boys might be more challenged in communicating with their parents. They might be more hyper independent. Some of the language that we've seen used in the developmental literature for boys, wanting to show a strong presence and not need their parents, where paradoxically they may need them more than ever, as Jarrid alluded to. So giving them a private means of reaching out can be very effective. And I think of my own experience with my kids again. They didn't want to, I crossed boundaries and was their hockey coach as well as their parents. So they certainly didn't want to show in the locker room that they needed to talk to their father. That was clear. They wanted to exercise independence there, but they even wanted to talk to me privately about their hockey game or their school. So any sort of scaffolding that gives teens, especially those going toward the latter part of high school, an opportunity to connect with parents, I think would be valued by them as well as their parents. I just want to say one additional thing related to this, and we know this based on kind of the nature of the work we're talking about here. Young people are so different. And so teens on the autism spectrum, for example, might be yearning to talk with their parents even more so as they get a little older and they're experiencing the social pressures of adolescence and maybe not feeling so connected to their peer groups in some cases. So having that lifeline to parents to talk about not only educational issues, but even some of the social things they're experiencing in school can be invaluable. So I'll give you one quick anecdote around that, going back to hockey again. I had a player who was on the autism spectrum, who was probably the friendliest kid on the team, but didn't have the social skills to connect with his teammates all that well, even though he desired it. but he connected extremely well with the coaches and other adults. So creating mechanisms for those students who have communication challenges to stay in communication with caring adults is so supportive and so important.
Yeah, and Pamela, if I could add one piece, build on what Mike was just talking about from another parent's perspective about something that she said. This was a mother of a high-functioning autistic child, and she talked about how he was quite quiet, as Mike just outlined. Didn't communicate a whole lot. When they started to find this consistent conversations and allowing it, really is student-led. So we talk about student-led as the students creating the gap, they're leading the conversation. And she talked about how these conversations were the key to unlock the door that she so desperately wanted to unlock to better understand her child so she could be a better parent. You're collecting, one of our jobs as a parent is to collect all these data points to understand who are our children. What are they interested in? What motivates them? Where's their flywheel? Where's their energy coming from? And when, as Sylvia talked about earlier, we understand what that is, we can get them closer to the peeps that they really want to connect with. And so it really unlocks that door in the communication, as Mike talked about. It really starts putting it into a package for us that we can start to understand, because so many of these kids are so different from us, the parents. So getting to know them better helps so much.
Yeah, no, for sure. Do you find that most of the communication is one-to-one, or do you create kind of like community-centric circles, if you will, for, let's say it's, for school, or it's for the sports activity or whatever might be going on?
Yeah, so we have a web of support is what we call it. So let's just say, for example, when Sylvia set up the account for us as a family, she can invite the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, other people in that child's life, speech language pathologists, therapists, whatever that kid's universe looks like. She can invite all these different people and have conversations with them because they all receive the gaps. So it might be once a week with the grandparent or the speech language pathologist, or the therapist can check in as well about what's going on in that child's life. So we can create a web of support for that child.
Yeah, I like that. And I don't know if you've thought about this too. It wouldn't necessarily hold as the kids get older, but I would imagine that this could potentially be an alternative to those that want to be on Snapchat or some of the other channels where they want to connect with friends. But you don't necessarily want them on those channels, but you do want to allow them to have those circles. And so, potentially as they're younger, that could be another alternative too.
A great idea.
Pamela, if I might, let me ask, I wanted to ask Jarrid and Sylvia a question that parents often ask, because you just mentioned other types of social media, Snapchat and what have you. So I'll throw this out to Jarrid. What differentiates GAB-on from other platforms? Like, why wouldn't you just text a parent, for example?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so we actually thought about doing it via text, but what we found was it wasn't really creating a community or safe space for the child to create their own environment that they're comfortable in. What we found, what we've heard from other parents, is that when kids are sending the GABs home and then they're leading the conversations, they're finding a safe space where they can communicate with a family that they create and they operate and they run for themselves. Standard texting kind of gets boiled into the rest of the texts that come home about homework or, getting things from school or sports. This is really a world that the child can control, have some control over. And that's where the advocacy that Mike's taught us all about, was the child has advocacy in this situation and they have a bit of power about what's going on in their lives. And that really helps. We saw that with Austin. His confidence really came out. His ability to communicate really developed because he knew when he was using GAB-on, this was his time. It was his world. He literally ran the conversation. And the other thing I'd say from a social media perspective is, social media, although kids are, my daughter talks about talking with kids, they're texting, they're snapping, but they're still isolated. It's not face-to-face. Whether we're talking face-to-face right now, we have eye contact, we see body language. In person's even better. But with that interpersonal communications and that interpersonal engagement, that really gives the feedback the child needs and can build a relationship with somebody and learn that scaffolding Mike talked about. Using other social media means they're still lonely. They're still alone in this world. Whereas we think we've created a safe space where we can actually connect and have engagement. That's so rich that every child, every person's, I don't know, desperate might be a big word for it, but really longing for it.
Not even sure desperate's a stretch, Jarrid. I think there are in many cases desperate needs to connect. We've seen more and more of this in the COVID and quasi post-COVID era, where there was a lot of isolation for young people and for people of all ages. So we're seeing the need to connect being greater now maybe than ever before. And in many cases, there is a desperate need to do that. Sylvia, I know you wanted to follow up on some of Jarrid's comments. Do you want to follow up on that?
I'm so sorry because I went to jump in a couple of times and I feel like I'm back in COVID because the dogs are still barking like crazy. So I apologize if there's some background noise right now. But I think Jarrid hit on the point I was going to jump in on, and that was that I think the main difference is, it's an intentional time for kids to think about what they want to talk to their parents about. And then that conversation has to ensue. It's not a back and forth texting. It's really a one way. This is what I really want to share with you today. And I really want you to know it. And so they're able to have the conversations. And then as a parent, we're able to share our stories with our children in the moment, eye to eye, face to face, and where those conversations can then go from, I think I touched on at the beginning, from smaller stories to the bigger conversations that need to happen. And it does not lead, it leads to the opposite of isolation. It leads to that sense of belonging. And so we often say that GAB-on is the anti-social media, because they feel like they're in the moment. They feel like they have someone on their side. They feel connected. And they're not feeling as our kids have often felt on social media. They're not feeling left out. They're not feeling that they're behind, unincluded, all of those things that, unfortunately, social media can have such a detrimental impact on them.
And if I could just throw in one more story, Pamela, about kind of how that evolved for us. Austin had sent home a gab, and it was robot consciousness. And he and I were driving. One of the things that he and I did together as hobbies was we used to weld. And he'd create characters that he wanted to create. And we were driving to the welding facility where we worked together. And he read out, robot consciousness. And I said, what is that all about? And he said, I want to bring consciousness and emotions to robots. I want them to be able to bring feeling and understanding and connection with humans as much as possible. And it was something I'd never heard him talk about before. And that led us into the conversation about how we wanted to create simulators for people and to be able to connect with machines so that as they're working together, there's a better relationship between the two. Now, he's very early in his school career, but he's studying this concept about how to bring consciousness into robots and technology. I would have never known this was an interest of his until he brought it up. It's that kind of insight for many stories like that along the way. But it really changes how you see what your child wants to study, what they're interested in, what they're passionate about.
Well, it definitely sounds like a gift in terms of how to communicate and bring families closer together. Anything left in closing? We've just got about a minute or so that you want to share how people can find out more. Mike, if you've got some areas where you want to share more about research, anything particular you want to share.
Jarrid, you want to go first about upcoming developments?
Yeah, so GAB-on is available. You can go to our website, which is gab-on.com. We're in the App Store as well. And so you can come to the website. You can go download the app. We'd love to hear about experiences you have with GAB-on. We're actually beginning to create a community of intentional parents who are engaging with GAB-on, not just to use it, but to share their experiences. And we can share those in the community that's larger about how to weave this concept into the culture and the fabric of the families.
Yep. And I would add, Pamela, that clearly the focus for GAB-on is student-parent communication. But the more I learn about it and the more I see the value in it, the more I see other possibilities for using it, including mentors communicating with mentees. Because mentors often have this concern. How do I follow up with the students I'm mentoring in between our sessions? I think if they had access to GAB-on, that would be one answer to that dilemma or that question. In fact, I told Jarrid and Sylvia I was going to purchase the app recently, and I haven't done that yet, but I need to do it and see if it can enhance my communication with my wife, because we often get so busy in our lives, we forget what we did during the day. So I think I'm going to try it and see how it works for parent or spouse communication.
It's Super. Well, thank you all so much for being here, and look forward to learning more about the communication and families and how to improve all of our connectedness.
Thanks for having us.